Today, we're about to hear a life-changing story. Laura is here to share a near-death experience that completely transformed her life. But before we begin, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Now, let's listen to what Laura has to share. Since I can remember, I felt like I was looking in on the world from the outside, like I didn't quite belong to this place where others seemed so at ease. It was as if everyone else had some kind of invisible instruction manual on how to be, how to connect, how to love, how to feel at home, that I'd somehow missed out on. I'd often catch myself in a quiet moment, observing my family, wondering how they could be so close yet feel so distant. My father's anger, simmering just beneath the surface, had shaped my earliest memories. It wasn't the kind of anger that exploded. It was colder, quieter, almost as if he was punishing me just by looking at me. My mother, on the other hand, was worn down, a shadow of a person whose gaze never really landed on me. She'd drift through the days, her words mechanical, as if each sentence drained a bit more of her. I understood, in a way. Her own struggles, her battles fought silently, all seemed to tell her there was no room for softness, not in our family. There was no sense of refuge here, no one to reach out to. As a child, I would spend hours trying to understand why I felt so detached, why I couldn't bridge the chasm between us. Growing up in this atmosphere, I learned early on that silence was safer. I carried my loneliness quietly, nursing it like a wound, careful not to let anyone see the depth of it. The world around me grew sharper, colder, and it only deepened my conviction that I wasn't meant for it. There was no anchor here, nothing to hold me steady when the storms came, which they often did. I was adrift, with no land in sight. Home was not a sanctuary. It was more like a battleground, a place where I had to stay vigilant. My father's anger, though silent, was fierce. It manifested in small gestures, in the tightening of his jaw, the dismissive wave of his hand, the way he'd turn his back mid-conversation as if I wasn't even worth his time. Sometimes, when he'd had a bad day, I'd hear the low, bitter murmurs coming from his room, curses barely audible but sharp enough to slice through any attempt at calm. His presence weighed heavily on every corner of the house, leaving no space for warmth or connection. My mother, frail and distant, would hover around him, eyes cast downward, careful not to provoke his anger. She was always tense, like a wound stretched thin, ready to snap under the slightest pressure. Her laughter, which I faintly remembered from when I was very young, was long gone. Now, she was a ghost, haunting the hallways with weary footsteps, her movements almost robotic. I'd try to catch her eye sometimes, hoping for a glance that might reassure me, something that might say, "I'm here for you," but she'd look away, lost in her own suffering, carrying burdens I could barely understand. In those rare moments when we sat together at the dinner table, an uncomfortable silence hung between us, thick and stifling. My father would focus on his plate, ignoring my existence, while my mother, eyes downcast, would pick at her food in silence. I wanted to break through, to scream, to make them see me, to acknowledge the quiet, gnawing ache inside. But I knew better than to disturb the fragile peace that kept our household from unraveling entirely. So, I kept to myself, learning to hide every part of me that felt too raw, too vulnerable. This wasn't a home. It was a cage, and each day I felt more trapped, the walls closing in, the air thinning. As I grew older, I craved escape from that house more than anything. School offered some relief, though it was far from an actual haven. I watched other kids move seamlessly in their groups, laughing, talking without hesitation, as if they all understood some code of belonging that eluded me. I wanted to be like them, to feel that I belonged somewhere, to matter to someone. So I began to push myself into their circles, pretending I didn't carry this darkness inside me, masking the ever-present ache with a practiced smile and a willingness to go along with anything they'd throw my way. But it didn't take long for my desperation to pull me into the wrong crowds. I found myself drawn to the kids who lived on the edge, those who shared my same restlessness, though for different reasons. They welcomed me, in their own way, sensing perhaps that I was lost like them. At first, it felt good, a thrill, a relief to finally feel seen. I would hang out with them after school, ignoring the growing worries gnawing at the back of my mind. They led lives tangled in trouble, yet somehow I convinced myself that I was finally part of something real, something that accepted me without questions. Yet, the longer I spent with them, the more I felt that I was slipping further from myself. They offered me a false sense of camaraderie, a fleeting feeling of belonging, but underneath, it all felt hollow. There were nights when I'd walk home from wherever we had been, feeling emptier than before, haunted by the realization that these weren't the connections I longed for. I needed something deeper, something that could fill the aching void I'd carried since childhood. But all I found was more pain, as if every wrong choice carved another scar into my soul. When I was 15, the need to escape grew unbearable. One night, after another silent, tension-filled dinner, I packed a small bag and left. I remember the cold air biting at my skin, the streets stretching out endlessly before me. As I walked with no clear direction, it was impulsive, reckless, but at that moment, anything seemed better than staying in that house. I convinced myself that freedom, even if dangerous, was worth the risk. I didn't think about where I'd sleep or how I'd survive. I just kept moving forward, too afraid to look back. The world outside was harsher than I'd imagined. The first few nights, I wandered aimlessly, sleeping in parks or under bridges, each sound in the darkness twisting my stomach with dread. It didn't take long for strangers to notice me. A young girl alone, vulnerable, without protection. I quickly learned that not everyone who offers help has good intentions. I fell in with people who sensed my desperation and took advantage of it, drawing me into situations that left me shaken, scarred, and even more terrified of the world. One night stands out in my memory, a night that nearly broke me. A man, much older, had found me alone, looking lost. He seemed kind at first, offering a place to rest and food, but as the night wore on, his demeanor changed. I'll never forget the coldness in his eyes, the way he looked at me like I was something he could control, manipulate, own. I managed to escape, but the encounter left me deeply shaken, more afraid than ever. I was spiraling, sinking into a pit of fear and isolation I hadn't known was possible. My fear of people deepened, and yet, despite everything, I didn't return home. I felt there was no place for me anywhere, trapped between a hostile world and an equally hostile past. The loneliness was all-consuming, and I started to wonder if there was any escape left for me at all. The isolation, the constant fear, and the relentless sense of not belonging began to weigh on me in ways I couldn't manage. Every day felt like another step deeper into a pit of despair. By then, I wasn't sure who I was or if I was even worth saving. The few people I had trusted had betrayed me, and home was nothing but a memory of pain. I started to believe that maybe my existence was a mistake, that maybe I wasn't meant to be here at all. One night, with nothing but the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, I made my way to an old, abandoned bridge on the outskirts of town. The air was thick and still, the world around me silent, as if it were holding its breath. I stood at the edge, staring down at the dark water below, my mind racing yet numb at the same time. The despair was overpowering, a weight pressing down on my chest that I couldn't shake. I thought about everything I had gone through, all the pain, the betrayal, the constant, suffocating loneliness. There was no relief, no light in sight, just an endless void that seemed to call to me, offering a release from everything I'd endured. A part of me hesitated, a faint whisper buried deep inside, questioning if this was really what I wanted. But that voice was quickly drowned out by the overwhelming need to escape, to silence the pain that had followed me like a shadow my entire life. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and then, In that final moment, something within me broke, giving in to the darkness. I closed my eyes and let myself fall, surrendering to what I thought would be my last moment on earth. But as the world faded, something entirely unexpected happened. An experience that would change everything I thought I knew about life and death. The fall didn't bring the swift end I had imagined. Instead, everything seemed to slow down, as though time itself had stretched. In the moments before hitting the water, I felt an overwhelming sense of stillness, a quiet that drowned out every painful memory, every haunting thought. Suddenly, I found myself outside of my body, suspended in a strange, weightless place. I was no longer falling, but hovering, looking down at the scene below. I could see myself lying there, lifeless and broken, yet somehow, I felt detached from the physical pain. It was as if I had become an observer, disconnected from the suffering that had once consumed me. Then, I noticed something else. I wasn't alone. The bridge was still, and in the distance, I saw faint shadows, blurred figures that seemed to be watching. I felt a strange mixture of curiosity and dread as I floated above the scene. These figures, they were familiar somehow, like echoes from my past. Faces I had known, people I had once trusted, and even those who had hurt me. They looked at me with expressions of sadness, remorse, as if seeing me in this state touched something deep within them. A sudden wave of emotion hit me, and I became acutely aware of the people I had left behind. Those who might mourn, those who might carry a sense of guilt or regret. My mother's face flashed in my mind, her weary gaze, her silent sorrow. I felt her pain more vividly than I ever had before, and it shocked me. For the first time, I truly understood the depth of her suffering, and in that instant, my own pain seemed to fade, replaced by a profound sense of empathy and connection. It was as if, in leaving my body, I could finally see the tangled web of emotions and choices that had brought us all to this place. I was floating in this space between life and death, feeling everything yet feeling nothing. A strange, serene clarity that left me questioning everything I thought I knew. Just as I began to find a strange comfort in that stillness, a shift occurred. The serene calm gave way to a creeping darkness, like a heavy fog rolling in, engulfing everything. The peaceful figures I'd sensed before began to fade, and an oppressive silence filled the space. I felt myself being pulled further away from the world I knew, deeper into a vast, shadowed realm that seemed to pulse with a chilling energy. Every instinct within me screamed to turn back, but I had no control over where I was going. I was adrift, carried by an unseen force into this dense, unsettling void. Then, in the darkness, I saw them. Figures with twisted forms, lurking in the shadows, watching me with hollow, piercing eyes. Their presence was suffocating, their gaze like cold steel piercing through me, stripping me bare. They moved closer, surrounding me, radiating a sense of malevolence that was almost palpable. These creatures, or whatever they were, didn't speak, but their intentions were clear. I could feel their resentment, their desire to pull me further into despair, as if they thrived on my fear and loneliness. It was like they were feeding off every painful memory, every scar I carried. My heart pounded with terror, and I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The darkness pressed in, wrapping around me like chains, suffocating me, filling me with an unbearable weight. I felt utterly helpless, as if I were being swallowed by my own fears, my own regrets. It was a place void of hope, a place that seemed to reflect the darkest parts of my soul. And just when I thought I would be consumed, when the last trace of my strength was slipping away, a single thought broke through the terror, a desperate plea, a silent cry for help, for anything or anyone to pull me from this nightmare. In the midst of that consuming darkness, my silent plea seemed to spark something. A warm, gentle light began to glow in the distance, breaking through the shadows with a radiance that felt foreign yet deeply familiar. The dark figures recoiled, retreating back into the void, as if the light was something they couldn't withstand. And then, out of that light, he appeared. A figure unlike anything I had ever seen. Tall, serene, and emanating a warmth that seemed to soothe every aching part of me. His presence was both powerful and gentle, like a shield against everything dark in that realm. I knew, somehow, that his name was Raphael. Raphael looked at me with eyes that held an indescribable depth, filled with compassion and understanding. It was as if he could see right through me, every sorrow, every scar, every mistake. But instead of judgment, all I felt from him was acceptance. "You don't belong here," he said softly, his voice resonating within me rather than around me. His words were a balm, easing the fear that had taken root in my heart. He reached out, a hand of light extended toward me, and as I took it, a rush of warmth flooded through me, filling me with a peace I'd never known. The dark figures lingered on the edges, watching with bitter, envious eyes, but they dared not approach. Raphael's presence created a barrier that they couldn't cross. "This isn't your end," he whispered, his gaze unwavering. "You have a purpose, a reason to go back." His words stirred something within me, a faint, buried hope that I had nearly forgotten. I clung to his hand, feeling a strength return to me, a reminder of something beyond the pain and despair I'd carried for so long. In his presence, I felt safe, protected, like nothing could harm me, not even the darkness within myself. As I stood there, bathed in Raphael's light, a deep calm settled over me, and the darkness seemed to fade into the background, like a distant memory. Raphael looked at me, his gaze gentle yet piercing, as if he was about to unveil something profound. "Laura," he said softly, "all that you've endured, the pain, the loneliness, it wasn't meaningless." His words filled me with a mixture of relief and confusion. How could all that suffering have purpose? Every scar, every loss. How could it have any meaning beyond the hurt it left behind? Raphael seemed to sense my doubt. "You've been carrying the weight of your past, letting it define you. But each trial, each hardship, has been shaping you, preparing you for something greater." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You are meant to be a witness, Laura, a testament to the strength that lies within, a living reminder of the resilience that carries us through even the darkest of times." His voice was calm yet unwavering, each word resonating with a truth I couldn't ignore. I felt a warmth rise within me, as if he had ignited something long dormant, a spark of self-worth, of purpose. He went on, his tone filled with compassion. "Your life is more than the suffering you've known. You are here to show others that there is light, even when all seems lost. Your journey has meaning beyond what you see now." His words stirred something profound, like a forgotten melody echoing in my soul. I began to realize that my existence wasn't just a series of painful events, but a path with significance, a chance to inspire others who might feel as lost as I once did. For the first time, I saw myself through his eyes, not as a burden or a mistake, but as someone with a purpose, a role in something far greater than myself. It was a revelation that left me breathless, filling me with a strength I never knew I had. As Raphael's words settled within me, I felt a pull, a gentle, insistent force drawing me back to the world I'd thought I'd left behind. I looked at him, uncertain, feeling a strange mix of longing to stay in his presence and an awakening desire to face life anew. He smiled, a look of unwavering kindness in his eyes. "It's not your time, Laura," he said, his voice like a soft melody that lingered in my mind. "You have work to do and a life still waiting to be lived. Go back with this understanding, let it guide you. And remember, you are never truly alone." The next moment, everything began to blur, Raphael's form dissolving into a shimmering light, the dark realm fading away. I felt my consciousness being pulled down, back into the weight of my own body. A cold rush flooded over me, and suddenly, I was aware of pain, of heaviness, of every sensation my body could feel. My eyes fluttered open, and I saw unfamiliar faces, Paramedics, doctors, a blur of concerned figures surrounding me. The sterile smell of a hospital room filled my senses, grounding me, reminding me of the physical world I had nearly left behind. I lay there, disoriented, but with a profound clarity that I couldn't explain. The memories of my encounter with Raphael were vivid, imprinted in my mind as real as any tangible experience. I could still feel his warmth, the strength he had given me, and it comforted me as I tried to process what had happened. My mother was there, eyes red from crying, gripping my hand with an intensity one hadn't felt from her in years. She whispered my name, her voice choked with emotion. "Laura, we almost lost you." Looking into her eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen before, a vulnerability, a love that had been buried beneath years of hardship. I felt a strange sense of peace, as if I were seeing her and myself for the first time. The old resentment, the loneliness that had haunted me, began to dissolve, replaced by a deeper understanding of the path we had both walked. This was a second chance, a gift, and as I lay there, I made a silent promise, to myself, to Raphael, and to whatever force had given me this new beginning, to live with purpose, to find meaning even in the hardest moments, and to carry this light back into a world that now felt, for the first time, like home. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and check out this next story. It's really moving.